All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things data and the Data Cloud Summit coming up next week in San Francisco. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, will be there along with a couple hundred enterprise software vendors and tens of thousands, I believe, of data enthusiasts. Of course, Snowflake is a beating heart of the data world these days. I mean, they are the data warehouse in the cloud of choice. They've really come a long way in a fairly short period of time. I actually had Bob Mulia on the show on our in our briefing room in like 2014. So 10 years ago, they were just really getting off the ground, and now they're an absolute juggernaut. They're a center of gravity, and they have a very clean partner vision where they handle the data management and everyone else can do their thing on top of this environment. And it's a very clever approach because when you start dealing with partners as a large provider, you don't want to step on toes. You want to have a clear line of demarcation. We do this, you do everything else. And that's what they do. So they have a great partner ecosystem. And one of those partners that'll be exhibiting at Snowflake this coming week is SQLdbm. I've got Keith Belanger of SQLdbm on the call. And Keith, you just threw out this concept, this moniker at me, the modern data practice. I
Yes.
love that. I like that a lot because it speaks to how the industry has changed, and things like data modeling, of course, have been around for decades, but how you deploy data models, how you design them, how you manage databases, that has changed dramatically. So tell us what you're doing at SQLdbm and how you're greasing the tracks to value from data.
Yeah. So like you said, data modeling has been around for a very long time. I mean, I've been doing it for 28 years, and but it started to get this stigma of it's a bottleneck, right? It takes too time. We don't have the time to do data modeling. And so what we've really done with our product is to say, well, how do you do data modeling in the modern data practice? Modern data practices have gone agile, right? They're decentralized. Have multiple source systems and multiple data platforms.
Right.
And so we have to accommodate that, right? You have to empower these teams to have a solution that will work, so that you can do proper data modeling to meet the needs of the modern data practice. So really, it's really our focus is how do you meet those needs? And we're a fully cloud solution, so avoiding installs and being in the cloud, being able to access from anywhere. You got a browser, people are all over the globe. They're not sitting in a desk. So really accommodating, being collaborative, being templates and acceleration, guardrails in terms of how do you make sure multiple people are following standards. So the ability to do all of that stuff to empower these practices to do proper data modeling, but to go at the speed of business is what I often like to say, is you're going to meet the business needs, but you want to make sure you're doing proper architecture and design at the same time.
Yeah, and so in this environment, in this cloud environment, you, I'm guessing, have a drag and drop style workflow design, schema design, where you can attach, you can tell what data sources you're using, and you can build out your models as a sort of, I'm just guessing here, a low code, no code type environment, which then attaches to your systems of record, your databases, whatever you're using to actually enact whatever changes you've made. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, many organizations, if we're talking Snowflake, for example, are doing data warehousing practices, whether that be doing dimensional star schemas, that the Kimball method that's been around for years, or things like Data Vault. So doing those, to your point, how do you do those in a accelerated fashion, right? So you can build templates, like I said, low code, so I can drag and drop, I can add the table designs, add columns, and like we said, creating those templates. So if I need to do a dimension, I can put the skeleton of a dimension so that it could be used many times and accelerate, drag and drop. And then when it's time to go to Snowflake, for example, we know what the raw proper syntax is, the proper that is needed to take what you just did graphically and generate the DDL code to
Right.
then deploy it into your pipeline to then, instantiate it inside of Snowflake, right?
Hmm.
Versus somebody going to a Snowflake worksheet and hand coding, create table statements, create view statements by hand. You can just do that all graphically and accelerate that process and visualize that design and how all of those data objects relate to one another.
Hmm. That's very interesting. So, I mean, you've given an interface for designing and optimizing data models on top of Snowflake. In this instance, I think you could work in other environments too.
Right.
But the idea is that you're giving a data modeler the capacity to build out a model and then just write the code dynamically to go ahead and publish in Snowflake. So that's how you expedite the business value because you take care of the what I kind of often refer to as electrical wiring, right? When
Yes.
you're connecting that stuff, it's like you got to pay close attention, and to have that automatically done, I think is fantastic because if you do that stuff manually, you know there are going to be errors, configuration errors, missing commas and things like that, and that causes you trouble, right? So to
Right.
automate that really executes the process and gets you to the business value much faster, right?
Yeah, and also to be able to graphically understand and see it, right? So if you were in Snowflake and you had a database that had, 500 tables in it, you go into Snowflake, you just see a list of 500 tables in an alphabetical order that means nothing to you, right? But with us, we can sit there and say, oh, this, the customer table has got a one-to-many relationship with the order table, right? Which also has a relationship to, the order details table, and these are the keys you join on, and this is the definition of those columns and the definition of those tables. So we all interpret and absorb things graphically much better than just reading, text, right? So here, a developer who wants to do analysis and wants to understand the data structures they need to leverage and how do I join those, and you can read that diagram, and I often say it's the blueprint of your database design, right? We can, when we're building a house, you look at a blueprint, you're like, oh, there's the kitchen. I walk through that hall. It's the same thing here from a data perspective, right? It's like, oh, I can see here, there's the table. I use that ID to join to that table. And it allows the consumer or the stakeholder to really understand what you've delivered and built inside that data platform.
Hmm. That's very cool. Yeah, and I try to explain to people data models are a tool for achieving optimal performance from an information system. That's really what you're doing, right? Is you're trying to figure out the optimal way to enable the flow of information for a particular use case, like a transaction, purchasing some product, searching for some product. And to get that right is a big deal because if you have a poor information architecture, a poor data model, things will move slowly, they won't be efficient. There may be other errors, quality errors or something that come through. So it's important to get that right because you want the system to hum. You want things to
Right.
work quickly, and people have very little patience these days. If you go online, I was talking to a gentleman just yesterday, and Kevin Klein from Solar Winds, and he was joking that slow is the new down,
Yeah.
right? If something is really slow, it might as well be down because people are going to walk away and do
Yeah.
something else. So this is all about optimizing the flow of information for your particular use case, right?
Yeah. And not only that, it's the interpretation of what the business needs. Like to me, I would say data modeling is telling me a story of your business. So
Hmm.
when you're doing modeling, you're kind of communicating, understanding what's the business need, what do they want to do, and then I have these raw ingredients of sources of data sources coming in, and I have to bring what the business wants and the terminology and the vernacular that they're using with this data that's coming from these variety of sources that are not in the terminology or even in structured in the way that the business needs to operate. They'll be coming from structures that, especially if you're using these like SAPs and Salesforces that are built for many different types, they don't call things what your business calls it. They might not call it client, they might call it account, or if you're lucky, if it's even a readable table name, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here you're sitting there saying this business needs it this way. I now need to structure a database design for a couple of things. One is to meet the business need, but to your point, then it has to perform, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make sure that using the right data types, you're using the right partitioning, or you're using the right clustering, or you're using the right keys so that when people do those queries, you're getting that performance? Because especially with things like Snowflake and modern technologies, when that wall clock is running, you're paying, right?
Right.
Consumption and compute costs. And so you want to make sure you're being very efficient and effective. So yeah.
That's interesting. And you refer to multiple sources, and goodness knows Salesforce has 8 million different configurations you could come up with because businesses are different and it
Yep.
has evolved over time. Do you see the whole practice as being significantly more complex these days because of these new sources, because of how diverse the topography can be?
Oh, absolutely. When I started 28 years ago, I had one source. I had the mainframe system, and everything came from the mainframe, and now in the last organization, I directly was working on a project where you had over 200 sources, right? Because you had
Wow.
IoT devices, and you had API solutions, and you had third parties that made data available to you. Then inside your own organization, people are building web apps and they're building, applications. So the next thing you know, and on top of that, they're coming from
Right.
Oracle or SQL Server, a JSON file, a API call. So yeah, you really had that complexity of all of these different formats. Volume, I mean, for years, right? We talked about volume, velocity, variety, right? The big data world, and that's the reality. So now, how do you translate that into something that your business can consume and comprehend? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so from a data modeling perspective, I have to make a data structure that is going to take all of this data and put it into a format that when the business says, hey, I just need to do my, you know, my some kind of ratio and analysis, they don't want to go traversing all of these different sources. They just want to go and, you know, people are used to the Excel pivot table. That's what they want to do, right? So how do you make it simple like that with and take all of this complexity out? And it's really modeling, and there are techniques in modeling, right, to handle this, like Kimball and Data Vault and stuff like that. So how do we accelerate and empower people to be able to do that modeling so they can get the data to their business, right? I mean, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do is people need to do an analytics, make decisions, and they can't wait a week, a month, 3 months, six
Right.
months to do that. Right?
Right. That's an excellent point. And I'm glad you brought up the apps too, because an app is useless without data.
Yeah,
And, what you really want to do from an organizational perspective to ensure integrity in your services and your product delivery or whatever you do is you want to be using golden sources of information and you want to have an architecture that allows you to do so efficiently. And so any app that you're building, it's going to need data. And you don't
yep,
want the data to be, what we used to joke, the redheaded stepchild, right? Where
yep,
it's like, oh, no one really pays attention to that.
yep,
Because if that data is not coming through in a fluid fashion, it's going to disrupt everything. It'll disrupt your business. People won't use your app. I mean, I've heard stories about how impatient people are with apps. And if
yep,
it doesn't work even one time, well, it's like, boom, done. I'll never use
yep.
your app again. And really, it's, in business, it's different than the consumer world, obviously, but nonetheless, if it's not snappy, if it doesn't get what you want done right away, your users are going to walk away from it, and then you just wasted a whole bunch of effort, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really big these days, like everybody's talking AI, ML, right? Even like Snowflake next week, well, it'll be a hot topic, AI. But your AI and ML are only going to be as good as the data you're training it with, what you're using, right? So if these data sources are not having great quality, or you're not modeling and bringing that data and putting it into a structure and or a format that your AI and ML can leverage, um, then you're either going to have bad trained models, or it's going to cost you a lot of money to build those models. So having a
Interesting.
solid data model and design that is the foundation and the backbone behind your training those models. Yeah, like you said, garbage in, garbage out, as they say, right? And like you said, there are some, especially if you're an organization using third-party data, you don't have control of it, but you can control what you're doing with it. And so how am I cleansing that data? How am I structuring that data, normalizing it, denormalizing it, and putting it in a fashion that your AI and ML can efficiently leverage it, so you can shorten that training time, increase the accuracy of what you're training with, and making value of what everybody's trying to do with AI and ML. So
Yeah. And I like that, and you kind of mentioned this earlier in the segment, how the data model is a blueprint for your business.
yep,
The information that flows through these systems and the path that it takes will show you a ton about your actual business. So it's good for the business people, it's good for the data people, obviously the IT people, and it's a great marshaling area for the schematic that basically runs your operation, right?
yeah, absolutely. It is that you're not going to build the skyscraper without a blueprint, right? And I mean, I would hate to see what you would get if you just had a bunch of builders who showed up. And in the data world, we kind of have that practice. Like many organizations just have a bunch of data engineers. They show up and they build. It's like, well, what are you going to get at the end, right? Building that blueprint, one, your stakeholders can agree and review and sit there and say, yes, that's what we want, right? Again, using that blueprint. Yes, I want the kitchen there. I want that there. that's representing my business. Now here, data engineers, here now people, this is what we're building, right? So you have something that can be interpreted by your non-technical, your business folks, and then you can have something that can be leveraged by your technical folks. So it's a very great communication artifact of
Hmm.
what the business needs and what you need to build. So
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Well, folks, look these people up online. SQLdbm, that's SQLdbm. We've been talking to Keith Belanger. I believe he'll be there at the show at the big Snowflake Summit. And hey, if you want to be on the show sometime, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. That comes right to yours truly. And I'll be there in San Francisco next week walking around. So send me an email if you want to hook up at the booth, have a couple quick words, learn about what you folks are working on. Info@dmradio.biz. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, gearing up for the Data Cloud Summit, sponsored by Snowflake, of course, a new center of gravity in the world of data. They have been an absolute juggernaut the last few years, along with Databricks. They've really captured the imagination of the industry. And as I was mentioning, Snowflake is very good at honoring their partner system, at not stepping on the toes of their partners. That had been a bit of a problem in uh, past situations in our industry. I won't name any names, but there were some companies that were at the top of the game and they didn't really play very nice with partners. They would act like they were going to be a good partner and then move in and take the deal. And that's not how partners operate. So, Data Cloud Summit, that's where Snowflake, of course, is hosting all their friends and family, if you will. Something like 200 vendors are going to be there. And I'll tell you what really excites me about this. And I mentioned this to another client of ours not too long ago, Steve Lucas from Boomi. I saw him in the hallway in California last year and at a Boomi event. And I told him, everyone's excited about this Gen AI stuff and this text generative capability. And it is amazing. Make no mistake about it. It's going to rewrite, no pun intended, the rules of creating content in our industry. It absolutely is. These Gen AI engines, they are consensus engines, is what they really are. They've been trained on a tremendous amount of content online. So for any topic that has been widely published about, they're going to be very good. And that's very useful stuff for understanding how a database schema works, what data modeling is all about, what analytics is all about, what you need to do to get good quality data. There are lots and lots of things you can ask these engines and get fantastic answers. Now, for the fringy stuff, for stuff that has not been very widely published about, that's where you get hallucinations because it can't build consensus if it doesn't have enough material to do so. But what I told Mr. Lucas of Boomi is that even though people are excited about this Gen AI stuff, which is great, what really excites me is what I called back then interactive AI. Well, that has now been successfully rebranded as something called AI agents. And AI agents, agent-based architectures are not new. We've had agent-based architectures for many, many years. There's a little agent, you land him in a system somewhere, and he sits around and waits to do things and accomplishes something when the time is right, when the appropriate triggers have been pulled, essentially. But these AI agents are significantly more compelling because they can, I won't say think, but to quote someone from DevRev, I interviewed him the other day, Ahmed Bashir. He made a really interesting comment. He said the difference between an AI agent and a simple automation is the agent can reconcile a decision from a multiple different options, basically. So it can actually, again, I don't want to say think, but it can reconcile. It can go, should I go A, B, or C? Well, because of X, Y, Z, I'm going to go B, for example. But if it's X, Z, Y, it could go A. The point is, these AI agents do have some semi-autonomous capability to figure things out. And companies like DevRev, for example, are using declarative programming to enable these agents to get what they need to do done in different ways. So you don't have to give it explicit instructions of how to do something. You just tell it you want it to do, and it will go and do that. So let's just think of some use cases for a technology like that. Think about how much trouble it is still to buy plane tickets for a trip. Even with all the modern technology we have, it still takes time to run the numbers to see which cities are going where, what are these prices, what are those prices. It winds up taking 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes. Well, does it have to take that long? I would argue that when these AI agents become really sophisticated and manageable, and that's a very big part of the equation here, manageable. I can tell you that Boomi is working on that with an agent registry. They call it the agent garden. I believe other companies like OutSystems, they're working on that. DevRev is working on that. Lots and lots of companies are working on these AI agents. Well, once they are manageable and efficient and controllable, if you will, within certain guardrails, you could just tell your AI agent, I want to go to San Francisco 2 weeks from now or 2 to 4 weeks from now. I don't want to pay more than $500 and I don't want to have any layovers, and just go boom, enter, and that little sucker will go and crawl around and do little queries on its own, little mini queries, and see, oh, is it there? Is it there? Nope, 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 nope. And it'll just keep checking at a certain pace, and then it'll find what it wants and go bing, and it'll get that thing and bring it back to you and hit you up on your cell phone. Ding, I found you a flight from these dates with no layovers. Click here to purchase the flight. Boom, you click and you buy. That, my friends, is the future of AI agents helping us through our daily tasks. And you could apply that scenario to any sort of work environment where you have to get things done. Wait until something happens and then take some action. Again, it's going to be challenging to manage these things because how exactly would you do that? I mean, you have to watch out for how they collaborate with each other, whether or not they contradict each other, for example. It's going to be very interesting, but you'll see, I predict some consensus engines around that space too, meaning you'll have maybe 5 different agents working on something. And if they all come up with an answer, they'll come together and there will be one overarching agent that decides which one of them has the right answer, and that's the direction it'll go. The key is going to be observability, knowing what the agents do. Was it writing to a log file? What does it do? It'll do something to articulate what it has accomplished. And that's probably going to be in some sort of a log file, which then a master operator will scan to look for problems and to look for efficiencies. But the point is, it's going to get pretty interesting here, folks. And there are different ways of doing it. A company called Verint, Dan Bodner, the CEO, we had him on the show a while ago. In their world, they talk about having agents, or I think they call them bots, they call them robots. And their robots do one thing and they do one thing very well. So these new AI agents are kind of looking at doing multiple things efficiently, whereas the Verint view of the world says, no, we want to have a number of agents and they'll each do one thing extremely well, and then they can coordinate with each other. Think about something as simple as managing the schedule. Let's say you're a hospital and you have 749 nurses who work at that hospital. Managing the schedule is a major pain in the you know what, especially if people want to take off or they call in sick. Well, who do you reach out to now? In the variant world, that's a problem solved because it's very clever. They use a points system where the nurses will all register for the system. They get their schedules given to them by their manager, whoever it is that runs the operation. But if they want to get out of something, if they want a personal free time day, a PTO, for example, they get points over time for having done their job correctly and having maybe filled in for other people. And so you can kind of cash those points in when you need to. And the point is, all the logic to make that happen is done in the background and doesn't require a person to look at this calendar and that calendar and wait, are we going to meet our quota here? Are we going to get enough people in the hospital? And the other nice thing about having it all digitized is that then you can track all that stuff very easily. Anything that you digitize can be tracked. And that's very important. So over time, the scheduling system can be very efficient and handling all these problems. Luke wants off today. No worries. Betty is available and she's in. Boom, just like that. No human even needs to touch it. You could have an alert set up where the human can look at it and see and make sure that it looks good, or you can put it on autopilot. And I'm telling you, more and more stuff is going to be on autopilot. But it's just like I said earlier, you need to make sure that you have observability. You need auditability. You need to be able to look back and see, okay, what did the agent do and when? Was that correct? And then you'll be able to curate and course correct these things. So, the point is, what I mentioned to Steve Lucas is absolutely the case. Interactive AI, or as we're now calling it, AI agents, they're the future. They're the future of enterprise technology. This stuff is powerful. And the other thing I'll say is that the Gen AI stuff also with these RAG models, retrieval augmented generation, RAG is everything. I mean, it's not everything, but there's the LLM, and then RAG around that is really where you're going to incorporate your governance, your security, your compliance, your data quality com initiatives. All that's going to come through in a RAG model, I think, in the future. And folks, we're going to see another refactoring. We saw one with Kubernetes. We saw one just going to the cloud in the first place. We saw one going to client server from the mainframe. And now we're going to see it again. We're going to see another huge refactoring. I would argue that almost every enterprise software company is going to have to do this. It's going to be a huge effort, but guess what, folks? Get on the bandwagon, get on your horse, giddy up, use the co-pilots, figure it out. This stuff is so important. It is so critical. Everything is changing. It's all going to gear around these new AI capabilities, the foundational models, the AI agents, the large language models, the small language models. Watch out for those small language models. I think that's where my money is placed, folks. Anyway, this has been a fun show to deliver to you all. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@dmradio.biz. You have been listening to DM Radio.